Now, again, this is where we got to bring up brothers like Ivan Van Sertima, Dr. Henry Clark. Brothers spoke on this and were constantly debunked by Western Common Core curriculums and also philosophy scholarship and all of those different things.
Right.
Dr. Ivan Van Sertima was under the, he gave irrefutable evidence of Africans being on the Americas far before Columbus. It's irrefutable. I mean, you have some of the plants that are indigenous to Africa that were found in America prior to Columbus arriving, such as the bottle gorge, the squash, the sweet potato. Those things were already in America. So you're talking about ancient African and Native American trade far before. You have the Olmec heads in South America.
Right.
So to start our history in 1619 is what you call episodic history. It's not holistic. It doesn't tell the whole story. Now, each part of this story is very, very key. To talk about ancient Africans as kings, merchants, astrologers, scientists, doctors, that's very important. And also, when we were placed into subjugation and put into slavery, the things we overcame and the things that we invented despite oppression and suppression. Both of these histories are very important, my brother, but we can't start it in the middle of the book, so to speak. You can't start a book in the middle and get the whole story. And that's what we're getting. We're seeing your history starts here. You had no significant contribution here. So this is the beginning of your history. This is all you've accomplished. And even the inventions and the innovations that you did, we're going to take that from you too.
Emmanuel, again, I appreciate you greatly. I know you're extremely busy doing great things. So starting off, I just want to say thank you. You're doing phenomenal work. So I just want to give you your just due, your flowers, all that just 10 times over, because you're doing amazing things. It's needed, knowing who we are as a people, where we come from, and so much more. So I appreciate you greatly.
Appreciate that. I'm looking forward to the conversation, bro.
Most definitely. Look, man, scrolling, I'm on social media, your TED Talk. I love him, man. Great person, great individual, historian, author. And seeing your TED Talk, I was just blown away. Everything was so just eloquent overall. The information, presentation, everything. It was just simple. Seeing that, I was amazed, man. So what inspired the TED Talk on social media? It sparked so much conversation, all of that. So what sparked that?
I've been teaching African history for the last 7 years.
Wow.
It goes all the way back to my family origins. My father's from Cameroon.
Wow.
My mother was a Pan-Africanist right here. She was from Chicago, the real heart of the civil rights movement. And so I kind of grew up with both sides of the diaspora. I got the African history side from my father, who never allowed me to believe that the history of Black people began in slavery. And then I got the African-American side from my mother. She taught me about the Black struggle, about civil rights and all of those things that happened right here in America, Emmett Till and all the horrible atrocities that we went through here. So I carried that with me to bring both sides of the diaspora together, bro, to bring us together to show that our history is greater than just the last 400 years of transatlantic slave trade, civil rights, but also it goes back thousands of years. So combining both what I was taught started it really for me. It sparked it, but I actually been teaching it for the last 7 years right here in New York, being a traveling adjunct professor, traveling from university to university, teaching the miseducation of Black history, teaching about ancient Africa, all of these different things. And that kind of got me recommended for TED Talk.
Wow.
So a sister named Netta Jenkins, who I met on LinkedIn, really good people. During COVID, we did a lot of events on LinkedIn Live. And, she was so impressed with me. After she did her TED Talk, she recommended me.
Wow.
So she recommended me to a TEDx organizer. So he looked me up and, he was like, man, is this something you'd be interested in? I said, absolutely. I looked up all the TED Talks before me. There are some things on African history, right? But there's nothing to the point where it's breaking down 5,000 to 6,000 years of African history within 15 to 16 minutes. You know what I'm saying? So
Yes.
that's what I felt that I needed to do to bring this enlightenment to the world.
Most definitely. And look, you're doing it, man. The Ancient African Antiques Research Institute, reading everything about it, what it's about, amazing work. And man, this statement to uncover, restore, reclaim, and reveal the missing piece of the human story, Mama Africa, man. What does that mean to you hearing that?
Yeah, you know, brother, when you go to Africa, right? You got two sides of this diaspora issue. So you got in Africa, you got Africans who are being taught that African Americans are negative, they're ignorant, they're violent, they're gangsters, they're mob, you know, they're pimps, they're prostitutes. This is a degenerate people. And then you come over here and they teach us African Americans that Africa is a jungle, is a bush, uncivilized, you know, poverty, war-torn countries. So how can these two people connect if they're hearing this from the media? You know what I'm saying? So me, a person who's been on both sides, I was able to like, no, it's not like that. And saying to my African brothers, no, it's not like that. My brothers and sisters here, it's not like that. You know, so it's really just trying to wake everybody up. You know what I'm saying? And not just our people outside our people. When we look at the horrible atrocities that we're seeing with the police, with George Floyd, when people look at you as a historyless people, you're kind of like valueless to them. Like they feel like, what are you doing here? You haven't done anything, no contribution to the human story. So they treat you as such. So when I say restore, reclaim, we're talking about from ancient Egypt all the way down to the things that were stolen from us, all the inventions, discoveries, innovations that we did right here in America. So from ancient Egypt all the way down to today, to the present day, inventions, innovations, that's the stuff that we're reclaiming. And then we're going to reveal it as African.
I love that. Exposing it, revealing. So often, right? We've grown up and seen movies where I think Moses, where Christian Bale was playing in it, and you see white main characters, but then all the people who are enslaved are Black. So it's like, okay, well, all the people in power were white people with British accents. But in ancient Egypt, where it's hot at the time, tropical environment, all these other things, as somebody who is well studied, how does that make you feel, whether it's watching films such as Moses or just so many other films where there's white British characters in an ancient Kemetic society? How does that just make you feel from analyzing film, representation, all of those factors?
Well, I realized that, you know, being in the film industry for a brief stint, I realized that it's not done by accident. So then we're talking about deception, right?
Right.
So obviously that makes me feel horrible. A person who wants to raise up African history and prove that our history is a lot bigger than what has been taught in our schools, I'm disgusted by it. So when I see these type of films, it's not done on accident. You got what you call a casting director, right? Right. Casting director's job is to find people for these roles. Okay. And he's saying to himself, the ruling elite are going to be white and the slaves are going to be Black. So this was all pre-planned out. So when you have films like Gods of Egypt, in fact, speaking of Gods of Egypt, I talk about this a lot in my seminars, that they were the one to issue an apology for what they did by making a pretty much predominantly all white cast in ancient Egypt. So my thing is, why issue apologies to what you did on purpose? You know what I'm saying? Facts. So the only thing is that the people responded to it, and this is why the power is in the people, because when we respond to it, when we don't see it, when we boycott like we did with the NFTA back in the days in the 60s, those things mean something. So when you see these whitewashed African films, it's good not to go see them. You know, so that's the way that we can deal with those type of issues. But it makes me feel horrible and disgusted. But it makes me also motivated to keep doing what I'm doing so that we can get the films that bring forth the truth.
Most definitely. That's facts. That's facts. So how do you feel when it'll be times, you know, whether it's in the comments or just from ignorance, right, where people think that ancient Kemet is in the Middle East, or it's this extension somehow, some way, which is a large extension of ancient Europe. How do you feel of people, sometimes Black people, thinking that ancient Egypt just consisted of white people or people of color, but not African, dark-skinned Black people?
Let's make this very clear. Ancient Egypt was a mega civilization. It was built by African people. The indigenous people were African there. There was always intrusion from Asiatics at the time. You're talking about the Hyksos, about other invasions that came really after the dynastic pharaoh period. But in the origins of Kemetic, you're talking about African people. Kemet means land of the blacks or the black land. So these people considered themselves to be Black African people, like any others. And even Greek philosophers who studied these ancient Egyptian people, which I mentioned in my TED Talk. These Greek philosophers, Aristotle, Pythagoras, all of these different Greek philosophers came to study in Egypt. And they were begging the priests for the knowledge to learn these ancient Kemetic science and mathematics, to carry it out to their own civilizations as well. So what we see is, again, the origins of humanity lie in Africa, but they also cannot allow or continue to promote Western Common Core curriculum if they give all the credit to Africans. You get what I'm saying?
Right.
Which also leads to, the brainwashing of African people. Even at a point in time, in the slavery times, you had so many scriptures removed from the Bible, and they were given to. That's what they call the slave Bible. That's even been found for those who are interested in. Just look up slave Bible, and they'll break down the different books that were taken out to promote slavery coming from God. So these are things that were done to continue to disapprove the African origins of ancient Egypt or any other Black civilization that followed.
Most definitely. What role did Christianity, I would say, play when it comes towards our overall confidence as a people? Because, during slavery, right, with that same point, we would have Black ministers just preaching about being good slaves and docile. We would see a white Jesus. So what role did Christianity play towards our psyche as a people?
Well, let's take it back. I got to take you back then, because prior to the Europeans embracing Christianity, they noticed that there was a distinct difference between themselves and Israel, right? The Romans were aware, the Greeks were aware of this. They knew that they weren't the same people. But also, it's quite apparent to know that the first copy of what we know as the Bible today, or the Dead Sea Scrolls, was found in modern day Ethiopia. So we know it was in Africa far before it reached Europe. So I believe they were practicing Christians on the African continent far before. They didn't use it to subjugate people like the Europeans did. They didn't use it to enslave people like the Europeans did. So I think it's important that we do note that Christianity, true Christianity, was not being used at the time to subjugate slaves. Now, with the Christianity that we know today has promoted that. It has promoted the subjugating of African people. And it's been used as a tool to separate people as well. So, but again, this is due to misunderstanding the Bible. This is also due to taking certain scriptures out, putting certain things in. And this is what would allow people to do what they eventually did, particularly European people.
Most definitely, most definitely. During this time now, you have CRT, critical race theory. And it's this big fear, right, of teaching about African history. But more so, too, it's seeing how in schools, Black history starts in 1619. What are your thoughts as someone who is an author, speaker, researcher, historian of Black history always starting during 1619, opposed to we have always been here, but for some odd reason, we always start off as slaves?
Now, again, this is where we got to bring up brothers like Ivan Van Sertima, Dr. Henry Clark. Brothers spoke on this and were constantly debunked by Western Common Core curriculums, and also philosophy scholarship and all of those different things.
Right.
Dr. Ivan Van Sertima was under the, he gave irrefutable evidence of Africans being on the Americas far before Columbus. It's irrefutable. I mean, you have some of the plants that are indigenous to Africa that were found in America prior to Columbus arriving, such as the bottle gorge, the squash, the sweet potato. Those things were already in America. So you're talking about ancient African and Native American trade far before. You have the Omelek heads in South America.
Right.
So to start our history in 1619 is what you call episodic history. It's not holistic. It doesn't tell the whole story. Now, each part of this story is very, very key. To talk about ancient Africans as kings, merchants, astrologers, scientists, doctors, that's very important. And also, when we were placed into subjugation and put into slavery, the things we overcame and the things that we invented despite oppression and suppression. Both of these histories are very important, my brother, but you can't start it in the middle of the book, so to speak. You can't start a book in the middle and get the whole story. And that's what we're getting. We're seeing your history starts here. You had no significant contribution here. So this is the beginning of your history. This is all you've accomplished. And even the inventions and the innovations that you did, we're going to take that from you too. The only thing you're really responsible for is, let's say hip hop, graffiti, and, you know, maybe some inspiration with jazz and blues and things like that. But we're also going to try to take credit for those things. And you see how ridiculous that sounds, but this is what Western scholarship has taught us. It's taught us that right in our history books, brother. And I mentioned this in my TED Talk. When I used to tell my brothers and sisters right here in Buffalo, New York, when I went to school about the ancient kings and queens, they would be like, bruh, I'm scrolling right through African history in 2 or 3 pages, and I don't see nothing about no ancient kings and queens. All right. And then when we go to Egypt, there's a whole bunch of white people portraying. It's completely ignores the kingdom of Ethiopia or modern day Sudan. It completely ignores the ancient Kush. It completely ignores Mansa Musa, the richest man of the AD period. It completely ignores the ancient Black queens of ancient times who African women were the first women to rule kingdoms, and Africa produced more women rulers than anywhere in world history.
Yes.
Those are facts.
Yeah.
So when we listen to these facts about how strong our women are, and think about when we hear about our Black women, oh, they too strong, they too this, they've been ruling kingdoms, bro.
Wow.
They've been ruling kingdoms. They were the first women to be considered governors, to be considered priests, to be considered scholars. African women were the first to do pretty much everything. So while at that time, we know that basically in Europe at that time, let's say 1300s, 1400s, they were just considered to be a vessel. And this is before any women liberation movements.
Right.
We're talking about going back to the AD period. We're talking about the BC period. We're talking about all African women were doing remarkable things. And it's something that's not been taught in our history.
Yeah.
But again, we get a clear understanding of who we are. We talk about gold and jewelry. Yes, so much of it. We still wear it to this very day. We still love it to this very day. That's our history, man. So there's some things that are still in our consciousness. We just can't completely understand why we do it, but it's actually from our ancient history.
That's a beautiful breakdown. And, that leads me to this next question, which is flowing perfectly. Emmanuel Reyes, right? So many times this story is untold, but, hearing about who she was and stepping on the Romans and, defending her land, that goes back to Black women and queens. Who was she? Because so often this story is not shared growing up in school. African-American studies sometimes is not even spoken about. Who was she?
Kandaka Reyes was a what you call today in modern day Sudan. It was called the Kingdom of Kush at the time. In fact, most of the gold that we see in Egypt and those Egyptian tombs and sarcophaguses come from Sudan. It's indigenous to the land of Kush. So this place was even known, even if you look in the Bible, you hear about the Queen of Kush bringing so much gold and her treasures to Solomon, right? So this was a queen of that particular area, Kandaka Reyes. The Romans had just sacked Egypt. Okay, this is around the time where the Romans, they thought that it was very important that they get control of Egypt to have control of the trade routes in the Middle East, so to speak, or quote unquote Middle East.
Yeah.
So they also noticed that there's so much wealth in the place you call Kush today. So they wanted to subjugate them too. So they came against this queen. She lost her husband. She lost her son, the prince, and then she lost her eye.
Right.
She's known as the one-eyed queen. She fought so hard against Augustus, I believe it's Augustus Caesar. She fought so hard against him that she cut off the head of his statue and what is known as Aswan today, cut off the head and buried it under her palace. They just recovered that headstone under Sudan just recently. So it's been buried for some years, some hundreds and thousands of years now, that she did this. So this shows the courage that she was like, we not standing for y'all coming to colonize us. And it got to the point where the Romans even had to come with a peace treaty. So she freed her people from taxation, Roman colonization, Roman oppression at the time, and got the respect of Augustus Caesar. That's what I'm talking about. When we talk about African women, we're still seeing it with our women, but the consciousness is lacking. So once we restore that consciousness, we'll see a lot more Imani Reyes out there.
Hey, that's a fire story, man. Yeah. Ancient Kush, right? So often we'll focus on the pyramids of Giza, which are amazing feats, ancient Egypt, but ancient Kush often gets overlooked. How powerful was ancient Kush, land of the bow, during this time?
Ancient Kush, many people believe it actually predates Egypt. A lot of people believe that it's a scholarship debate right now, because actually Kush has way more pyramids than they are in Egypt. Okay. We know that there's a cultural exchange there, and we're constantly seeing that the Egyptians always gave reverence to the South as their origin. Okay. So very likely the Kush some people from Kush probably helped develop what Egypt is today, what Egypt became in its height. Again, they were well respected with wealth. They were well respected in warfare. They were a known nation. But essentially, these two nations is like America and Canada. They're cousins, man. They're cousins, so to speak. But it was a great civilization. I mean, you're talking about King Pianki, Taharka, Shabaka, the Shabaka stone. And talked about Imani Reyes. We talk about the 25th dynasty in Egypt a lot of times where the unification between Kush and Egypt was one nation. Wow. I mean, so when we talk about in comparison to these two nations, we know that they shared a lot of culture. Some of the gods are worshipped, some of the same dress attire. Even so much so when the Egyptians spoke about the Nubians or the Kushites, they considered them to be brethren, as opposed to how they considered the Asiatic. They considered the Asiatic to be their enemy, not of divine origin, but they considered the Kushites to be of divine origin. Sometimes they were allies, sometimes they were enemies. I think when it comes to scholarship, a lot of times they would say Egypt is white, Kush is black, okay? Because they didn't get along. So again, they try to use these common modern day constraints to put Egypt and Kush against each other. That was not the case. These were two African nations, and we don't live in a world where all black people get along. Let's just keep it real. Black nations, they don't always get along. There was constant warfare between African nations at times. So just because at times these two nations didn't get along, it didn't mean that they were completely different races. So that's an idiotic statement for the scholars who believe that. But that's why we're constantly seeing from the scholarship is Egypt is painted as white and Nubia is given its true African origin. and it's put together like it's like this race battle between these two, which is not the case.
Wow, it's powerful stuff. In TED Talk too, talking about ancient Kush, learning about the Greeks, studying there. So often, in scholarship, we're always taught about Plato, Socrates, but all of these great men had to study somewhere. How important was ancient Kemet and Kush for pretty much civilizing or just building and instructing, educating ancient Greece during that time?
Well, you look at the things that followed. I mean, you talk about the arts, the science, the astrology, the calendar, the 30-day year, the 30-day month, the 30-day month, excuse me. These things started in ancient Kemet. The knowledge of these things started in ancient Kemet. I believe it's it could be it's Aristotle, I believe, who was mentioning how a lot of the Egyptian philosophers would not give him the, excuse me, it's not Aristotle, it's Herodotus. Herodotus mentioned how the ancient Egyptians would not give up, the priests would not give up the knowledge unless they studied through them for a certain amount of years. Right. So this is exactly what these European nations did to gain access to the knowledge of ancient Kemet. And they took it back to ancient Greece. These people were sent as mercenaries to go and learn the ancient civilization mystery at the mystery schools. And they took it back. And even to this day, look on the back of the dollar bill. You see the Eye of Horus there, right? You see the pyramid there, which means, the opening of the mind, the understood deeper thought, the illumination, so these things all come from the ancient mystery schools of Kemet, which is now known as Masonry, right? It all goes back to ancient Africa. So the Greeks used it, the Romans used it, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, they all used what was considered the first mega civilization, which was ancient Kemet. They used the knowledge from this region in order to build their civilization.
Wow.
So that's why you see the whitewash. That's why we seeing that whitewashing, because they like, man, we can't allow people to know that the people that we're going to enslave are actually the masters of civilization. We can't allow that to happen, because if that's the case, why are we in position of power if we learned it all from these people that we subjugate? So
how do you justify it?
Exactly.
Yes, sir. Washington, D.C., nation's capital, right? We got obelisk, got the Lincoln Memorial, Jefferson Memorial. How African are these concepts?
They're very African. I mean, even the White House comes from the White House of Heru. Again, these things, all of these concepts comes from ancient Africa. When America's founding fathers, or quote unquote founding fathers, their goal was to be considered the new Egypt. This is why a lot of the Masonic traditions were carried from ancient Kemet. I mean, even the eagle is very similar to the ancient Kemetic sign as well, which is a bird as well. And we also are seeing a lot of respect for certain animals throughout history when it came to putting this animal to represent a nation. Egypt started that. Their respect for nature and all things that they did. I mean, we're talking about the cat, we're talking about the eagle, we're talking about the bombardier beetle. All of these represented something. It represented some sort of consciousness. It wasn't about the Egyptians worshiping these things. They just understood that these things had a certain strength that could be utilized. You get what I'm saying?
Most definitely.
So, those concepts are still used to this very day, bro.
Yeah.
Still used to this very day. And again, if you allow it to be known that Africans or Black Africans did this, you're essentially saying we got everything from these people. And that's what we don't want to happen.
Most definitely. On your TED Talk, again, you were dropping heavy gems. The Pyramid of Giza, hearing that, representation of pi. Mathematics, right? Growing up, so many Black students, whether it's in middle school, high school, don't feel confident when it comes to math and science. But then knowing that we come from a people who originated math and science, utilized it. how significant overall was the Great Pyramid of Giza, and how advanced was it during this time?
You can talk about the Great Pyramids of Giza. You can talk about the Pyramid of the Sun right here in America, how they're off by 0.0001. So that shows you that they had to be the same people that built these things. So we had to know our math, right? We had to know our math in order to build these type of, had to use some sort of ancient concrete, had to figure out how to use some sort of machinery to pull these blocks together and create this. So we understood measurement.
Yeah.
Where do you think the word chemistry comes from? Kemet.
That's a good breakdown.
These things come from, again, all from ancient Africa. And they did this by just figuring things out. For example, the meter was measured by a drop of water, which is always the same size, always the same all the time. So they use nature in order to figure things out, the things around them. They observe the solstice just by looking at the Nile Valley. If you go to Egypt right now, you can see the stars very clearly at night. How much so, much more so when Egypt was more tropical, before desert, you can see the stars even more clearer. So these ancient Africans were just studying the stars, studying the patterns that they were seeing. This led to the first 30-day month. This led to the calendar being created, to what we use today, 365 and a quarter day calendar. All of these different things were used based off African observation and study. Okay. Again, another reason why the Greeks and the Romans came into Africa, even after Egypt was starting to get into its decline, they still wanted that knowledge. So that shows you how important it is. Now, I always tell my students that I talk to, when you hear chemistry, think of Kemet. And that's very important, bro. It's very important. Kem, land of the blacks.
Yes, sir. Land of the blacks, right? That's knowing that, right, is just extremely important overall, because, you know, during this time, Kevin Hart, Black Sands Entertainment, recently attempting to be canceled for being too Afrocentric for ancient Egypt, which I know sounds like this oxymoron in itself, right? So when we would have people who were naysayers, I guess you will, who will try to say, well, these people were of lighter skin, and that look at Egyptians right now during this time, where these French people somewhat. Where did all the people from ancient Egypt end up going? Was it to the Sudan? Was it to Western Africa? How did the people look during that time opposed to right now, currently?
What people need to understand is that Africans didn't just stay in one place over time, especially after warfare, after colonization, after different things, and also desertification. People were moving as the Sahara started to dry up. People moved into more tropical regions as well. So the Egyptians, a lot of them are still there. They have what you call today modern day Aswan. If you go into Aswan, Egypt, Luxor was the original capital of Thebes. You're finding your more African Egyptians there. Okay, they're still there. It's a vast number of them too. But as you go further north to Cairo, you're seeing more Middle Eastern individuals mixed with Turks, Romans, Greeks, French, Vandals. I mean, it's just a mix of different people up there. It's kind of like the United States, right?
Right.
United States, you know, originally was Native American land, and eventually it became a melting pot for all people after colonization happened. Egypt is different. You have documented history of the Arab invasion in the 7th century. Prior to that, you had the Persian invasion, you had the Greek invasion, you had the Roman invasion, you had the French invasion, you had Napoleon who came in. I mean, all of these things happened. So you're talking about over 12 different invasions and immigrations to Egypt. Okay, because Egypt was considered to be the mega civilization, the first mega civilization. So everyone felt that they had to have control of Egypt to take control of the Nile Valley, period. So that was pivotal for every civilization to get a hold of. And right now, the Arabs have their hold on it right now. still to this very day.
Most definitely. On your page, it's a picture of this tree. You have Africa at the roots, right? You have the wall. Can't see one side of the tree, of course. And then you have Europe bearing all the fruits, which is so important because right now, all the resources are being drained out of Africa. Europe is flourishing. For kids, young kids, even kids in college, right, will learn this information about Europe. But how much, if all, the resources is Europe right now taking from Africa, and how long have they been taking from Africa throughout this time?
You see, the problem that Africa has right now is we have the resources. The problem is we can't mass produce or manufacture the resources. If you've ever seen a real diamond, it's not like it looks when we get it here.
Correct.
It has to be manufactured the right way. There's Africans in Ghana, which produces most of the cocoa, the coffee, that have never tasted chocolate, that have never had a cup of coffee. Some of the miners. I had the pleasure of going to the Congo, and I had the pleasure of seeing. This is not pleasure, actually. I had a heartfelt issue seeing 747 planes flying in and flying the resources out. Wow. No passport. Okay. No having to go to any boarding screenings. They fly these 747 planes in, take the resources, fly them out. Now the mines are gated off, so you just can't just walk on these areas, just so people know. But you can see the planes flying in, and you can see them flying out. And you know what they're flying out. The diamonds, the rubber, the cobalt, coltan that we use in our cell phones.
Correct.
All of these resources are going out to build other civilizations. And I've said this before, my brother, that Africa, the subjugating of Africa has given birth to other civilizations. And it's very sad that Africa has to suffer for the rest of the world to live. This is the reality. This is the reality of the world that we live in today. So you're talking about, again, we mentioned just the coffee and the coke. What about the crude oil? Some of the purest oil lies in Africa. Nigeria, Cameroon with cocoa, with shrimp, and all of these different things that are indigenous to Africa. When they tell you that 56% of the world's resources come from Africa, I kind of think it's a little more than 56. Or
56 is like already high by itself.
Right.
Wow.
And my mistake. I think it's 46, they say. So when they say 46, I'm gonna add another 20%. That's probably more than that.
Most definitely.
Yeah. So, again, you can't believe everything you read. You got to be real careful being a historian. You also don't want to reach. Sometimes a lot of us, we do reach, and we got to be real careful that we can prove with resources the things that we're saying. But definitely the resources have been used to build other nations, including the United States of America.
Most definitely. So talking about up to 46% of the world's resources, right? How do we protect Africa, or just at least try, right? We're talking about 50 plus countries. I get it, different governments. All of us are scattered all throughout, whether it's in the Caribbean, Europe, South America, but how do we at least attempt to try to come together and protect Africa?
I think it's a good start to start taking our trips to Africa.
Yeah.
To learning about these different areas. I mean, we have these ancestry.coms that are allowing people to connect with the different parts of Africa that they may be from. But getting there, stop allowing the media to tell you that Africa is this place that's a jungle, that's a bush, that's uncivilized. I mean, you have your rural areas, yes. You have your villages that are underdeveloped, yes. But there's still cities, beautiful cities, some of the most beautiful scenery. We have to stop being scared. We have to educate ourselves. We can't go there thinking that we know everything either. Go there and learn something. The first step is going home. You have to go home to see what it's like. Then as you learn systems, you create businesses, you do different things that can help build Africa up. You are going to run into some issues with the different governments throughout Africa. That's why this requires learning the system. When I take a lot of these tours, the very people who are telling you not to go to Africa or telling you that Africa's impoverished are the ones who are there, while we are not. So when you talk about going to Egypt, and you talk about going to Sudan, or you talk about going to Ghana, or you're talking about most of the people on the tours are non-African people. That's very important, bro, to know. So the same people who are telling you not to go to Africa are the ones going, because they're looking for their own opportunity or looking out for their own interest, for their business, or how that they can get an edge on something when it comes to trade, or when it comes to technology, or when it comes to resources. They're looking to get this edge, while we're thinking Africa's impoverished. I don't want to touch it. So the first step is getting connected back with the motherland before any change is going to happen.
I love that. Knowing who we are, right? Proper education, knowledge. How important is that, right? Because we can grow up and think that all we are, like what you were talking about just earlier, about entertainers, rappers, ball players, but instead not knowing that we were and are mathematicians, engineers. How important is that for us growing up?
Again, we don't want to be, we want to be all that we can be, right? And to be all that we can be, we have to know all that we have done. It's the old saying, to know thyself, to know thy history. You know, Atlas Browder once said, if you start your history in slavery, well, she actually said that if African history was 1,000 pages, slavery would be 999. That's what she said exactly.
Yeah.
Throw that on record. But that's a real statement, bro. So if basically we're essentially, according to her statement, we're only taking 1 page of our 1,000 pages and saying this is our history. It's unacceptable. So it's so very important that we take that whole 1,000 pages and add it to who we are, because Africa is one of the most diverse places in the world. And I always tell people when they say, I don't know what part of Africa I'm from, I don't know what tribe. But if you don't know that, guess what you can do? You can claim it all. It all belongs to you. My father's from Cameroon. How do I know 2 or 3 generations before my father was born, his family didn't migrate there? How do I know that? That doesn't matter. You know, that doesn't matter to me. I know my origins are from the continent. And I know where my people have been throughout the continent. So if you don't know which particular part, it don't matter. All of it belongs to you. That's the importance. So we need to look at all of this. When you listen to my TED Talk, you hear me talking from South Africa, North Africa, East Africa, West Africa, the Middle East, parts of the Middle East that were ruled by Africans as well. Talk about what Professor Ivan Van Sertima talked about in the Olmecs in ancient Africa and ancient America. The traveling, the trade between Africans traveling, the first people to circumnavigate the globe. I mean, there's ancient Egyptian artifacts in Australia.
Yeah, wow.
How did that happen? how did Africans couldn't travel the seas according to Common Core curriculum? They didn't have the boats, they didn't have the ships to do so. But there's ancient Egyptian artifacts of Pharaoh Khufu in Australia. Wow. So again, we're constantly being able to prove that our truth is a lot deeper than we actually know. But again, study to show yourself proof.
And that was going to be my very next question. And can't make this up, right? Studying, right? Being well-studied, researching, being an author, speaker as well. How much research went into this TED Talk, whether it was studying the great Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Shankata Diop, John Henry Clark? How much work went into this?
A lot of work, because when dealing with TED Talks, if your sources don't check out, they will not post your talk. Wow. And the other thing that they will do is they will post they will post a disclaimer at the bottom of your talk that states that these facts have not been confirmed. The speakers, it is the speaker's opinion and not based off facts that we have approved. So they will, even if they do approve your talk sometimes, they will put the disclaimer that it may be faulty. You get what I'm saying? So you have to make sure you got your facts lined up, okay? Especially speaking something that could be against the norm. what we know as the norm. I see this as a big victory for my TED Talk to get published by TEDx, because at the end of the day, you're essentially saying, TEDx is essentially saying, all the things this man is saying is true. So it took a lot of study. It took a lot of studying different historians, paying respects to brother like Dr. Anthony Browder, Kandaka Reyes, Runoko Rashidi, who took me on my first tour to Egypt. Like these brothers right here who have been doing this work, underpaid, not being booked for gigs, and still doing this work. They deserve a lot of the credit. You know, and anytime I get on a platform, I make sure I shout those brothers out, because I learned a lot from studying them, from listening to them. You know, I grew up in a lot of this stuff with my father, but those brothers helped me to connect the resources together to be able to prove this stuff, the references. If I didn't have these brothers to teach these things to me, you know, and I also got to give a shout out to Kemet New. Kemet has been taking brothers back and forth to Egypt for the last 30 something years. I mean, just the amazing work that's been done before I came on the scene. So I always give credit to those brothers because I studied through them. And again, I was raised in a lot of this stuff. My mother was a Pan-Africanist before she became a teacher. So she was an educator. She was affiliated with the Black Panther movement. And not only that, my father was always taught me that we come from more than what they say today is slavery, the 400 years that we've been in this country. So quote unquote 400 years, that we're more than that. So having those things combined is what made me who I am today. So it's very important to make sure when you're speaking this truth, be very careful, because there's going to be a lot of opposition. There's going to be a lot of haters. If you go and look at my Amazon, Black Pharaoh, Rise to Power, my book, you'll notice a few of the haters that did with the same thing that they did with Kevin Hart. And you're blackwashing Egypt, you're lying, you're Afrocentric. And you know what I tell these people? I say, how can I be Afrocentric about a country in Africa? You know what I'm saying?
That's something.
How can I be Afrocentric? You're saying Kevin Hart, Emmanuel Kulu, Black Sands are saying, you're saying that we're blackwashing African history, basically. You're saying we're Afrocentralizing African history. Do you know how ridiculous you sound?
Right.
Kaba Kabane said this on an interview that me and him had together. He said, well, if you're the one who built the pyramids, how come you didn't do it where you come from? How come you had to come to Africa from where you were? You came to Africa and you decided, like, look, we're going to build this great civilization right here and not in our land. Does that make sense?
Most definitely. Wow.
So it doesn't make sense that these were the people who did it. So again, you have to, you're going to have to deal with a lot of scrutiny, even with speaking any type of truth. You can talk about, you know, Christ who endured sufferings in order to get his truth out there.
Right.
And to this very day, people who are still trying to prove truth to this day still go through suffering. So if this is the world and the lane that you want to be in, be prepared that you're going to suffer a little bit.
That's free game right there, man. Kaba Kamene, living legend, man. Shabaka Stone, and hearing you talk about Pharaoh Shabaka in your TED Talk, exactly who was Shabaka?
Shabaka was a Nubian king. He was one of the greatest Nubian king. And I even hate to use the term Nubian, but the term Nubian really means it means land of gold. So it actually is derived from a word called Nubi. So he was one of the greatest Nubian kings of the time where the combination of Egypt and Kush were one kingdom. And when you hear about the Shabaka stone and the things that were trying to be decoded later on, these are the things that came from him. So again, another great African king. Still a lot of study to be done on Shabaka, but I can tell you that he was one of the greatest African kings of his time.
Love that. Black Pharaoh, man. What inspired the book, writing that and sharing that information for us as a people?
Well, I, Black Pharaoh, first, let's make this real clear. When you look up I, Black Pharaoh, some people think I, Black Pharaoh means black skin Pharaoh. It doesn't mean that. The term black was used as a marked completion in ancient Kemet.
Wow.
So you see those pharaohs, let's say King Tut, right? There's a all jet black painted sculpture of King Tut. That means he's completed his course. He's completed his course. He's ascended into what they call a god form or god, right? So this is what I, Black Pharaoh meant. It meant the pharaoh of completion. Just to make that very clear, because I did get some pushback from brothers saying, well, most of the pharaohs were black. So why would you just say this one pharaoh was black? But that's not the case. So I was just wanted to clarify that. But I, Black Pharaoh is based on the time of Pharaoh Hatshepsut and Tutmosis III. Hatshepsut, we always hear about Cleopatra all the time. Obviously, she was under the Ptolemaic period. She was mixed with European. So they always want to glorify Cleopatra. If you really look into it, what did Cleopatra really do? Nothing. She didn't do nothing really great for Egypt. So why people even argue or fight whether Cleopatra was black or European, it's really not even worth the argument because she really wasn't relevant besides what she did for the Romans. She didn't do much for the Egyptians. So I usually just cut that off, and I always start with Hatshepsut, who was an African woman who ruled for 20 years, okay? This is before women liberation movements, brothers and sisters.
Wow.
This woman built the Djeru, the Holy of Holies, which is still an archaeological wonder to this very day. Even some of the Washington, the buildings in Washington resemble Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. And Tutmosis III, who was considered to be the Black Pharaoh, the Pharaoh of completion, who was the greatest Egyptian conqueror. So he's known as, I hate even using this term, but the Napoleon of Egypt. So the conqueror, the Napoleon of Egypt's kings. Really, Napoleon is the Tutmosis III, you know what I'm saying, of Europe. So the reality is, though, that he was the greatest conquering pharaoh, led to one of the most wealthiest parts of ancient Egyptian history of all time. So I wanted to combine these two stories of this great pharaoh woman and this great pharaoh king who preceded Hatshepsut right after her, how they had little bit of conflict with one another, but also how they used their power to build the nation up to its height. To also throw in a few wrinkles of thriller, to throw in some adventure in there, to show the majesty of ancient Africa, and to bring people to make you feel like when you're reading it, to make you feel like you're actually there. The goal is to transform this book into a novel. Not into a novel, into a graphic novel, and then transform it into a film. That was my original goal, so people can visualize, and then script writers can say, this is a movie we can see, let's turn it into a film, and then put it out there to the world. We're in the works of that right now.
Dope, okay.
We are in the works of that right now as we speak. So Brother Kevin Hart, you are not alone. We're all going through the same things where some producers are rejecting the film because they feel, it's blackwashing or Afrocentric.
Yeah.
But you also have a lot of them who are very interested, but they fear the backlash that they're going to deal with. So I'm working with a few different producers at the moment that are looking for a studio to pitch this and take us to the next level. So I think it's really important for us to see Black Panther really opened up the gate.
Yeah.
Opened up the gate for African films, for Black powerful films, and they're seeing that it's making money. They're seeing that it's making money. So they're intentionally not doing it because they feel that it would empower Black people to a whole nother level. Wake up that consciousness that we talked about earlier.
That's it.
It's deep, man. It's deep.
Yes, sir. Man, Emmanuel, you've been so gracious. I only have like 3 more questions tops. You've been great, man. Film and media, right? Earlier, we started off, talking about Moses, gods of Egypt, hearing about your story now. why is it so scary, right? So me and my friends, like, we dissect movies and film all the time. We have shows like Godfather of Harlem, which is dope. We have, of course, Power, where it's showing about drugs, or Black history shows 9 times out of 10 are always based on like the civil rights movement. But white shows, we always have Game of Thrones, which is more of a like medieval type. You got Last Kingdom, Vikings, like it just goes on and on and on. But Black historical stories or shows always stop at civil rights era, or probably to like the 1920s. But it never covers Egypt. It never covers ancient African civilization, ancient America. Why is it so scary to show us in ancient Kemet? Or if we are shown, it's just always as slaves, maybe.
Well, again, because you would have to admit all the lies that you've told all these years. And you also have to admit that the first mega civilization that we still see remnants of to this very day, usually in every city, you see an obelisk downtown. Think about that. In every major city in the United States, in the UK, you're seeing an obelisk. Where does the obelisk come from?
Right.
Kemet. Look on the dollar bill, you're seeing the pyramid, seeing the Eye of Horus. All of this stuff originated from these people. So if you start to say the people that are considered to be the lowest on the totem pole are the ones who created this civilization, you're essentially saying we got everything from you. And then you'll start to question, you're going to be questioning, why do those same Africans who started that civilization don't have control of that land now? So now people are thinking, we owe these people lands because they built this civilization. That's what's bringing a lot of fear to the consciousness, to the awareness of this was an African civilization, because people don't want to give it back. Think about it. Think about the fact that Native Americans had to be given some sort of reparations in order to settle their issue with Europeans when they came to this country. That's a situation that people don't want to happen in Egypt. So this is why they constantly will fight tooth and nail about Egypt being a Black African civilization, because you're talking about people being owed some sort of reparations for their civilization being taken, their land being taken from them, probably forcibly against their will. And on top of that, you have to discredit all the study that you've done, which a lot of people who've spent their whole entire life, using these deceptive ways to promote a Eurocentricized version of Egypt, their careers would start to become on the line. Their scholarship would be on the line. So it goes so deep, bro. It goes so deep as to why they don't want that to happen. Because now you got to admit that you've been lying all this time. And you got to admit that these people that you called liars, that you said were Afrocentric, and you said were this, and you said were that, you have to now give them the credit that they deserve. And that's not something that they want to do or put themselves through.
Come on.
Think about all these people who got degrees, man. Think about all of these people who have master's degrees, PhDs, and all these people with all of these degrees. You would have to say all of those degrees are null and void if you start to reveal the truth. So you're talking about undoing and unraveling a lot of stuff that a lot of people won't be too happy with you.
Yes, sir. Eurocentrism, right? History Channel growing up, I used to love it. I used to think it was so cool. But then, over time, when you get knowledge of self, you start seeing, it was a lot of lies and BS, right? One of their most popular shows is Ancient Aliens. Ancient Aliens, you have on Egypt and saying that there's no way that these primitive people built these pyramids, and why were they built? They were built for the gods, all this nonsense. Then on your page, and Eddie Griffin's one of my favorite comedians of all time, you have a comedian breaking down how these pyramids were built. But people, like what you said, who have PhDs, careers, books, TV shows based off of ignorance, have Ancient Aliens. What are your thoughts as someone who is well studied in this field when you hear white people say that, hey, these Black people, if they were even African, indeed only built this by the help of giants and aliens who were flying around?
So think about it like this. While you were talking, I was pulling up some information because I want to drop this too. But
please,
anyone who would say that anything to discredit Africans building the pyramids they will do.
Mm.
The pyramids were done with such mastery that cannot be understood today. And Runoko Rashidi once said, you can't come from a Eurocentric perspective trying to understand African phenomena.
Mm.
That's the issue. This is why they have to say that something other than human created this civilization instead of. Now, you mentioned Eurocentrism, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want people to hear this definition. It says, Eurocentrism refers to a discursive tendencies to interpret the histories and cultures of non-European societies from a European or Western perspective. Common features of Eurocentrism are thought to be ignoring or undervaluing what Asians or Africans did within their respective societies.
Right.
Now let's look at Afrocentrism real quick. It says the extreme cultural and political movements who mainly African American adherents regard themselves and all other blacks as syncretic Africans and believe they are the center of worldview should positively reflect African values. Ask yourself which two of those sound worse.
Eurocentrism.
Exactly. So Afrocentrism, which has been demonized, Afrocentrism, right? It says they just basically want to center the worldview from African values, right? And then it says Eurocentrism, they have a tendency of undervaluing what Asians and Africans did in their own societies. And it also says seeing their societies from a European perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So again, understanding these words is very important. So when you hear terms like Afrocentrism and Eurocentrism, it's very important that we look these terms up and ask yourself, which is worse? Forcing people to look at things from through a European lens, or saying that the beginning of civilization began with Africans, which is considered Afrocentrism, which is also considered science. Right? So again, this is why I say you have to study, you have to have your resources, and you have to have your references. If you don't know that Professor Louis Leakey, who has become widely accepted in evolution, in Western Common Core curriculum, Louis Leakey said that the first human remains were found in East Africa, the Horn of Africa. So if you know those things, are you saying that Professor Leakey is also Afrocentric?
Wow.
You know, if we're saying that ancient Egypt in the Bible tells us the first mega civilization was ancient Egypt. But the book of Daniel says this was the first civilization to fall. So if that is the truth, right, you're essentially saying that the first mega civilization was in Africa. So again, throughout the TED Talk, we prove that from science, if you believe in evolution or you believe in a creation, it all go back to Africa.
Yes, sir.
There's no escaping it. You can't escape it one way or the other. It still goes back to Africa. Civilization began in Africa.
Wow.
That's where I rested.
Yes, sir, man. Emmanuel, before we bounce, my second to last question, right? You've worked with the great Kaba Kamene, you studied from Runoko Rashidi, Ivan Van Sertima. How do we pass the torch, right? And make sure that our children, our nephews, nieces aren't misinformed, aren't studying critical race theory and thinking that everything starts in 1619, but instead knowing that we are the mothers and fathers of civilization, mathematics, science, history, chemistry, like what you say, and so much more.
And that's where it requires a lot of us. And Kaba Kabane, shout out to him, because he was an educator before he became a historian. So he was working in the schools. I'm currently working at Buffalo Public Schools. I'm currently creating a curriculum to push, starting in New York State, because that's where I am presently, but we want to push the AREA curriculum throughout the entire country to those who will accept it. So again, the goal is getting into the minds, talking to your children as you become enlightened. Don't think that this information is too deep for the kids. Our creators out there, we got to keep creating. We got to show the beauty of our culture, the beauty of our history. Once you know these things, you got a responsibility. You know, so use that responsibility to educate the next generation, you know, because Tupac said, he said, I may not change the world.
Right.
I'm gonna spark the brain that will change the world. So that's the mentality that we have to have about our future generations. And that's African consciousness. African consciousness is not that I should do better than my children. It's that that's European. That's European history is they want to outdo their children. African history was that my children should be greater than me.
Yes, sir.
And we have to get back to that mentality to train our children to be what we wasn't able to be because we see the generations down the line are the ones who are going to bring forth that change, even if we couldn't. But you could have been the start of it. So we have to keep forward thinking in order to change this narrative.
Wow, that's powerful, man. Emmanuel, you've been phenomenal. Very last question. Where do you see yourself as an author, researcher, speaker, educator within the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I can see me continuing this journey. I know it's not going to be a 5 or 10 year thing, and it's just going to be over.
Right.
Many years past my lifetime for it to get this way. So I know it's going to be a lifelong struggle. But at the same time, I want to continue building with different brothers like yourself, continue building with different scholars that have a similar viewpoint, continuing to travel the world, whether via Zoom or in person, to teach the miseducation of African history on a worldwide level. A lot of times there were a lot of barriers for a lot of our former African historians. I mean, whether it be finance, not having the ability to move about like they want. And the problem that we run into in Africa is that Africa does not have the free movement. So you can't go from one country to another country in Africa. You have to go from one country, fly to Europe, and then go back into Africa with a lot of the African countries. So I definitely want to continue to bring people back to the motherland. That's a very big thing for me. And a plan for AREA after we finish our Untold Golden Age of Africa tour. Within the next 2 years, we want to start taking our brothers and sisters back home, giving them tours on some of the archaeological sites of the things that we've done in our ancient past to raise the consciousness of not just African people, because everybody originated in Africa, to raise the consciousness of everyone.
Most definitely. Look, I'm for it, man. Where can everybody follow you, support, the Institute, everything?
Yes. Thank you, my brother. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Look, we appreciate you, man. Keep doing phenomenal work. Keep going. It's needed. And I appreciate you. And thank you for your time. I had a great conversation with you. So it'll be saved. And then when it's posted, I'll share it with you. So thank you.
Thank you, my brother. Make sure you put my links in there too for me.
Oh, I got you. I got you. And look, speaking of links, where can everybody follow you at?
Yeah.
Website, all that good stuff.
You can find the AREA. You can find us at www.aaaria.org. You can contact myself at aaaria.info@gmail.com. You also can find me on Facebook. I'm most active on Instagram and LinkedIn. That's where you mostly gonna find me. My Facebook is Emmanuel Kulu. My Instagram is IAM_Kulu. And also my LinkedIn is Emmanuel Kulu as well. So I'm easy to find. I'm out there. I'm on all the platforms. You know, hit me up.
Yes, sir. Look, I'm gonna have all the links posted, so I got you. But Emmanuel, man, enjoy your weekend. Thank you, brother. You keep doing phenomenal work. It's needed. Much love.
Thank you too, Brian. You keep doing your thing too. I love the podcast.
Thank you, man. Humble.
Yeah.
Peace.
One love. Yep.
Yes, sir.